Call the meeting to order. At 931 Young Street. For directors online, I can't see you all that clearly, and so if you want to speak, I'll look up, but it's better if you sort of verbally share a virtual hand up. So just say Mr. Chair or something like that, if you care to speak, please. Like a motion to approve the agenda, please. Councilor Fletcher?
Yes, I will.
Moved by Councilor Fletcher, all in favor? Hands up, please. Thank you. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none. Like a motion to confirm the public meeting minutes of November 27th, 2023. One of the directors that was.
I'll just move that.
Okay, moved by Councilor Fletcher, all in favor, thank you. And then on items on our to-do list, the horizon list, are there any questions or comments of the items listed there? Okay. We'll see any. Just a motion to receive that information for the public record, please. Okay, Councilor Fletcher moves that. All in favor? Thank you.
It's easier, you can see my hand.
Okay, then we have our first deputations on the 2024 public work plan. Yes, Ms. Wilkinson. Catherine Wilkinson is joining us. Good morning.
Morning.
It's a little.
Okay, is it my time to speak? I wasn't aware. Okay.
Yeah, just
Okay.
no need to speak up.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, so I wanted to identify a couple of items. Some are tenant services that are not on the annual work plan. And I encourage members to note them as I speak today to consider if they warrant further consideration. So the first one is the call center. At minimum, an annual update, including statistics and challenges and service levels, vendor services. For the first time in Toronto community housing history, tenants will have the opportunity to provide feedback on the services provided by contractors. So that's really exciting. The initial report went through BIFAC, but I do believe the results of the pilot and next steps should be coming through the Tenant Services Committee as it falls within your mandate. Service hubs. This is a brand new service delivery model that's been implemented. Getting a status update on the challenges, how we're addressing them, and the impact on the call center. CCTV cameras. At minimum, again, an annual discussion, a status update on the annual cost, maintenance, repairs, and response times, and consider whether the return on our investment is actually reducing antisocial behavior and vandalism in our communities. Community safety. Status on the city's review of community safety unit. I don't know where that went. But beyond the CSU report to Toronto Police Services, the operations performance report only speaks to crimes against property, people, and fire. We are not talking about the most common community safety issues that happen every day in our communities. There is no opportunity for tenants to address community safety if it is never an agenda item. The window air conditioning replacement strategy. Phase 3 is this year. Management is usually required to keep the board apprised of any changes in legislation. And there was a change last year, Bill 97, under the Housing Services Act, revised regulations permitting tenants in Ontario to use window air conditioners within specific guidelines. So I think there should be a discussion as to how that legislation impacts Toronto Community Housing's strategy prior to moving forward. And the last one is tenant policies. There are no tenant policies on the work plan. And while the deputation policy will go before the governance committee for governance oversight, I think it should also come through to the tenant services committee, where the majority of tenants actually depute and have a good understanding of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions of the deputies? Councilor Fletcher?
I don't know if this is working or not. No? Oh, I have to hold it down. Pardon? If I'm holding that down, what's happening? Can you hear me online?
Yes,
But I'm not here. Yeah, what are you holding down, Paula? I'm sorry.
I'm holding a button down,
Oh,
on, off. How about now?
That's good.
Okay.
yes.
Catherine, have you sent in your deputation in writing?
No, but I'd be happy to post meeting.
Could you do that, please, with your list of suggestions? I think that would be helpful. And I don't know, did the TAC look at this work plan as well? Was this something that the TAC's had some input into? Yeah, you know,
That would be a question for staff.
I think she's on it.
So I can advise, the committee work plans are set by the committee and the board. They haven't in the past, and there have been reviewed by tenants. And we did not have the tenant advisory committee review the board's work plan. Board sets its work plan. But that doesn't sorry about that. It doesn't limit the board's or committee's ability to add matters to the work plan that it believes to be appropriate at any time.
Sorry, I just don't know. So I'm sorry, I can't run this microphone anymore. It's been too many years. I haven't been here. Can you hear me?
yeah, well, you're fine, Paula. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. So just on that,
So do you have any more questions for the deputy? Can I release her?
no, I've asked if she'll give us that list because I think that's helpful. And then I did get the answer that the tenant action advisory committee hasn't had a chance to review some of that. So based on some of those suggestions, I think it's always helpful for big pieces of, call them legislation or plans, to, once they're gone to the board, or to have at least a tenant eye on them, because we have that ability now to do that. So I'll just ask Tom how that might work.
Sorry, just from a procedural standpoint,
Oh, yeah, sorry, we're doing that.
So you're done with Ms. Wilkins?
Yeah, I'd asked her a question
Right.
and she didn't answer it. Here answered the question, so I thought we were into that now.
Okay, so thank you, Catherine, for your deputation. Now it's questions of staff.
Not yet. Oh, Scott.
Yes, through the chair to the council. So certainly as it relates to, I think, those significant policies, and you said that reflect legislation, I think that is the opportunity to review those with the tenant.
I guess, I'm interested because Ms. Wilkinson, who actually used to chair this committee many years ago, had a list of things that she felt would be important to review. And I'm not sure how those would be incorporated here, because they're not in writing. I can't really refer them to you, but that's what I'd like to do if she sends them in.
So, now I'd like to follow up with your questions, and that's the staff are some of the, would you expect that these topics such as the call center, the service hubs, status of CCTV, also the security measures, would they be covered in the COO reports just as a matter of course?
So through the chair, Happy to answer that question. In terms of the call center report, we do include it in the COO reports. If there is interest in adding an appendix at the end of the year to kind of do a full year retrospective, we can do that as well. I don't necessarily know that we need a separate report, but we have all the data. Happy to speak to it. The closing the loop update, we can bring that as an update report to the committee, so we can do that as well. Service hubs are coming back in April to TSC. So we'll be having extensive discussions about that. The CCTV cameras, the request for an annual report subject to the board. If that's requested, we will do that. No issues there. The community safety reports, I think we need to maybe have a discussion about that. So right now, we do have updates through the Community Safety Advisory Committee, CSAC. And so I don't know if there's an interest in adding additional information at this table, but theoretically that would go through CSAC. So again.
Okay, the deputy also made mention of legislation in regard to air conditions, but that would come. Go ahead.
So through the chair, again, that could be a report that we bring to this table through our facilities management under the leadership of Alan Reed. So subject to the request of the board, we're happy to bring a report on that. And then the final item around tenant policies, complete alignment with Mr. Wilkinson's comments. We don't have any significant policies that impact many tenants that we wouldn't bring through Tenant Services Committee. So right now, we don't have anything in the immediate future, but we would absolutely bring any relevant policies that require board input to this table.
Okay, so any comments or questions from directors online?
John, if I may, it's Debbie, I thought Catherine's comment on Bill 97 was interesting. And Nadia, I'm not sure if it's you or Tom. I'm assuming that when you come back to report to the board on phase 3 of the rollout of our plan to have air conditioning in our apartments, that will be taken into account. My sense is that we will need to look as a corporation in if we will allow tenants to install their own units within specific specifications as the new legislation allows.
So through the chair, I will work with my colleague, Alan Murray, the Vice President of Facilities Management, to bring a report to this committee. So I don't know if it needs to formally be added to the work plan, but we can do that this year.
That would be great. Thank you.
We can treat that as an action item arising out of this report if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I just commented, that would be one too that would be good to get feedback at from the Tenant Advisory Committee as well.
So this report will go to the board for approval. I guess what I'd like to do is make a motion that some of these suggestions be incorporated. So with reference to the call center, service hubs, CCTV review, community safety report, and any pending legislation. Staff can come back with a revised work plan. We could indicate where those items fall. It may fall under a CO report, it may fall under a separate item, just so it's shown here on the work plan. Is that reasonable?
Yes, we can treat that as an action item. Between now and the board meeting, we can try and come up with an amended version of the work plan that either identifies those items that the deputy identified as discrete items for the agenda, or how they'll be addressed within the context of the existing report structure.
So we'll receive a revised work plan. So that sounds good. Okay, so I move that motion. Seconder. Mr. Fletcher, you want to second?
Yeah.
All in favor? Any questions? All in favor? Thank you. Okay, that's good. That was very helpful. Next, we have the Office of the Commissioner of Housing Equity Work Plan, performance appraisal. And that's item 7. And just want to have perhaps will you tell us a little bit about what you have here, please? Provide us with a brief overview.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for
You're welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, just get a little closer to the microphone.
Okay. There we go. So thank you. So through the chair, I'm pleased to report on the work plan results for the OACH for 2023. So in 2023, the OACH committed to 3 goals. So the first was ensuring successful tenancies, training, and reporting. As you have the results before you, I will present a high-level overview and describe how these results will carry us into 2024. So the first goal of ensuring successful tenancies is the bread and butter of OACH work and guides our interactions with tenants in TCHC to avoid evictions and ensure successful tenancies. As part of Goal 1, in an effort to curb the flow of referrals to the OACH and shift responsibility to resolve more files with the regions, we worked with TCHC to implement the Stage 1 checklist and began pre-screening files for compliance with the arrears collection process prior to assigning them to an early resolution officer. So in order to measure this goal, we predicted that referrals to the OACH would decrease by 30%, and that we would get approximately 600 cases, which occurred as we got 585. We also committed to avoiding eviction in 80% of cases from TCHC and achieved 82% success with files from tenants who are tenants from the senior or vulnerable portfolio and 79% from tenants from the family portfolio. For Goal 2, we committed to support TCHC in the rollout of their new arrears collection process. This was not completed in 2023, but we are scheduled to complete it in Q1 of 2024. And OACH is working with TCHC now to offer support, and we will be part of the training when it is rolled out to staff. In addition, we committed to training frontline staff on topics that we noticed they would benefit from based on our audit of arrears files and on questions and feedback we received during our bi-weekly case conferences. So we provided 25 training sessions, which were attended by approximately 150 staff each, and the feedback we received was positive. In 2024, we're collaborating with TCHC, continue to identify and provide the necessary training. Additionally, we will be continuing our bi-weekly case conferences, and we received and debriefed with TCHC and our EROs, and we'll be reconfiguring them in 2024 to ensure they meet the needs of TCHC. So our last goal was related to reporting, and as you can see, we met all of our commitments in this regard. So I just want to end by saying I'm pleased to answer any questions that you may have, and I want to say how excited I am about the achievements we are seeing by working more closely with TCHC, and I'm sure these successes will continue into 2024. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Questions from committee members?
John, it's Debbie. Thank you for that report. It was good to see the referral out to the necessary services. Do we ever follow up in terms of the outcome of those referrals? I'm just trying to see how much case management your office has been doing.
Thank you. So through the chair. So we work with the case. We have 45 business days to work with them. And what we do is we will make a referral and then we will include the contact information in our report back to TCHC because we don't have carriage of the file long term. It goes back to TCHC to manage once OACH has stabilized the arrears. So it would be going back to TCHC, and should the tenant fall into arrears again, the expectation is that frontline staff would reach out to those resources. And if they were unsuccessful at working with the tenant, it would then be referred back to OACH.
Okay, I'm trying to see where there is an accountability between OACH and the referring organizations. So you refer to the organization works with the tenant, the file then goes back to TCHC, who is supporting the tenant. So there is then no feedback loop then for you to know that this intervention that you've been using is working for the tenants. Is that correct?
So the feedback loop would be if the tenant breaches the repayment agreement. So if we resolve the matter through a repayment agreement, if the tenant breached, it would then come back to OACH. So we would know the referral didn't work and we would set up another referral if required.
Okay, so there's a break there. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's unfortunate.
I have a couple of questions. So do you, so it says 217 files, 27% were sent back to TCHC to resolve. Do you track what happens to those files? Do most of those files then get solved by the tenant service coordinators? Or do a certain percentage of those, a high percentage of those come back?
Thank you. So through the chair, I anticipated getting this question, so I have the numbers. So I could let you know.
Are we that predictable?
No, that's for preparation. So I looked at the 217 we sent back, and I'm happy to report that only 39 came back to OACH, so about 18%. And the top three reasons that we're sending them back is like compliance with the orders collection process. So perhaps an N4 wasn't served, or the frontline staff didn't make an application for the housing stabilization fund, or there was insufficient contact attempts. So often when we send it back, staff are able to resolve it without it needing to come back to OACH. And we provide guidance and support when sending it back. So we give staff advice on how to resolve it, so it won't need to come back to OACH.
Right, actually, that sounds like a really good result. And then of the agreements, the repayment agreements that you put into place, you also track whether or not there's follow through and success with those. So over the course of the year, now I would expect that the repayment agreements that are put in place, you know, in January are probably still good to March and April. But do you track? So of the files that you have, how many of those are failed repayment agreements from the year prior or the year prior to that? Or how many of these sort of still, you know, they become problematic again?
Thank you. So through the chair, so we rely on TCHC to identify the breach of the repayment agreement. So when it breaches, they notify us that it's breached. So right now we have we say it's about 30%. That being said, we are going to be doing an analysis or our next biannual report, because we did do a tenant survey to tenants about why they breach agreements. So we plan to look at it more closely, and it'll be included in our next report to the board on what the breach repayment agreements are and how many agreements OACH brokers get breached and go back.
Any other questions from committee members? No? Okay, so, motion to, receive the information. Moved by Councilor Fletcher. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Next item. Next item is, number 8, the COO reports.
Sorry, and just on that last motion, that's the motion
To approve.
receive and approve and recommend the board.
Right.
So
Yes. Okay, okay. Okay, so then we have overhoused households, and I'll just ask this particular topic of other questions from committee members, questions of staff.
Oh, we have someone from the Hampshire.
Oh, right, yes, sorry,
Sorry,
I see.
and Jen St. Louis is here from the Tenant City side, from the Housing Secretariat.
Great. Okay, great.
I guess this is a big issue.
Yeah, it is.
I'm going to do a couple of remarks.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to welcome Jen St. Louis and Doug Rollins, who's online, from the Service Manager, Housing Secretariat, who's our oversight function from the city, and Lindsay Veets, the Director of Operational Planning and Program Services from TCHC, to present on Overhoused. The presentation is accompanied by a report which provides additional information related to process changes, backlog, and communication, along with the approach management is proposing to take with respect to ensuring all currently overhoused households are right-sized. Now I'll hand it over to our presenters to walk us through.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me online too? Yeah. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to hand it off to Jen to cover a few slides that are relevant from the city's perspective. So there are a few objectives to the program that we're doing with respect to overhoused households. We're focused on bringing all of those currently overhoused households into compliance with the rules. We focused on following the provincial legislation and working to integrate with the city's rent cafe platform. We're also focused on clear and proactive communication with tenants, staff, and stakeholders, and consistent application of the rules as laid out by the Housing Services Act and the City of Toronto's RTI rent geared to income manual.
Thanks, Lindsay. So just a bit of an overview of what we're talking about here. So an RTI household becomes overhoused when they're living in a unit with more bedrooms that they are eligible for under the local occupancy standards. So for example, a couple whose two children have grown up and moved out, and they remain living in a 3-bedroom unit. So the city's objective is to implement the Housing Services Act and the City of Toronto RTI admin manual. We have instituted a mandatory process for right-sizing a households. And just to be clear, the rules around overhoused apply to all RTI households that are under administration of the City of Toronto, not just TCHC. So all social housing providers providing rent geared to income housing must comply with the same process and the same policies. We are focused on having a fair, equitable process that allows options for households to remain in the communities where they live. And as well, we have a process where households are at the end of participating or not participating in this process. If they have not been right-sized or haven't participated in the process, they will become ineligible for rent geared to income subsidy. So that means they will receive a loss of eligibility notice and will have to pay market rent. That it's not an eviction. So I think Lindsay will talk more about that. There's a misconception that folks get evicted if they are not right-sized, but that is not the case. Next slide.
Oh, we're asking questions as we go or at the
Is
end?
that okay to take questions as we go along? I think we'll take questions at the end too. Okay, so go ahead.
So can I just ask if that's for all, this policy now, is this just TCHC or all RGI units for all the social housing providers that use service?
Yeah, it's for all RGI households.
And would RGI tenants at TCHC be able, they're overhoused, be able to access, is there a coordination between all providers? So you may have to leave JCH, but you could go to Wood Green in a smaller unit.
So and we'll go through a bit more about the process, but someone who's overhoused has a priority on Rent Cafe, so a priority in the system. And as councillors particularly know, we have lots of priorities. So we have a local priority for people who have been homeless. We have a provincial priority for people who have survived violence, domestic violence, and or human trafficking. And so this becomes another priority on the centralized waitlist. So you're correct, councillor. Households would be able to have a priority within the greater social housing system.
Yes, okay.
Next slide, please. So just to be clear about the city's objective, really it's about the optimal use of a limited resource. So we want to ensure that the people are housed, the most number of people are housed correctly in a system that clearly, we know, due to being in a housing crisis and the number of households on the waiting list, is a very scarce resource. So just to put that into context, there's currently a bit over 2,000, and Lindsay may have updated numbers, households that are overhoused at TCHC. And if you contrast that with 17,000 households, distinct households that are on the centralized wait list for 3+ bedroom units. So essentially that means you have 2,000 people who are households who are occupying a space in a way that's not the most efficient way. So the average length of time that households at TCHC have been overhoused is quite a long time, which is why we started implementing this. So 3,000 days, so that's many, many years. So our objective in working together on this is to ensure that tenants get all the, and households get all the information they need to participate fully in the process. The expectation is if people are participating in this process, they will get housing offers.
Can I just ask another question, because I'm sure you did, John, but get a lot of calls from underhoused people that have small apartment and lots of children, and they need it. How are you coordinating for overhoused with underhoused across the system, which might be just direct in and out?
Yeah, so there isn't a city priority for underhoused, and I know that TCH is reviewing its transfer policy, so I don't actually know if there will be a priority for underhoused. However, someone who is housed in underhoused can be on the centralized wait list for an appropriately sized unit. And so we're hoping that but they do not have a priority in that system.
And just asking, because I'm here with you,
Yeah.
is that not if you're underhoused, there's overhoused throughout the system, not just TCH, and there's underhoused throughout the system. Is there not a plan to coordinate that with the underhoused for Wood Green, for St. Clair, for TCH?
So there isn't currently a plan for that. I think the plan is to focus on folks who are not housed within the system. And we can talk more about that later.
Okay.
Next slide.
So I'll speak a little bit about the backlog of households that are overhoused in TCHC portfolio. So it's approximately 2,100 households in this category. And this is a result of a number of factors. Jen spoke about how long the TCHC households have generally been overhoused. So we see this as a result of how the way the previous rules were structured. And there's a little bit more detail in the report itself about that. And I'll get into that in the next slide. We also had a COVID-related pause on all unit transfers. And we needed to work closely with the city to ensure that we were implementing any work to address this backlog in alignment with the city's choice-based system, as well as in alignment with the provincial legislation, which has changed in the past couple of years, which is referred to as the one offer rule commonly. We are proceeding to get all backlogged, or we are proposing to proceed with all backlogged overhoused households, get them in compliance. This is a requirement, as Jen outlined, for a number of reasons, from the service manager to free up larger units, and in order to responsibly manage the valuable public asset in the face of a housing crisis. So next slide.
Oh, question, sorry, I want some numbers here. That 2,100 and the number 3,170 days, that's somewhere between 8 and 9 years, I think, average.
Yeah.
So what's the, if you were to group, so that's it. That means there's a lot of people past 8 years in order to make that the average. And what does that look like? Is it, how's that weighted? Or maybe,
So I don't have a breakdown available, but I can absolutely share a breakdown of how the households, it was a straight average calculation. So number of years, number of households. But I can definitely share the breakdown on that data.
Mr. City, do you have that, Jen?
We don't, because it's a TCH list of overhoused households.
Right.
But we are,
I just mean in general, 5 years, here,
oh,
12 years, this many, 10 years, this many, 9 years, this, so just we see what that, how that average gets made up, not by names, but.
yeah,
Of course, sure.
yeah. And just in the implementation, we are starting with households who have been overhoused for the longest period of time and then cascading down that way.
How long will it take you to work through that list of 20? Well, let me ask you, how long does, I mean, how long does each file take?
So it may be helpful if I can walk through the slide on
Oh, yeah, there's
process.
another slide that talks about how long it takes, right?
Yeah, and I will make sure I don't answer
I'll come
that.
back to my first question later, okay? Okay, no, sorry, go ahead.
Great. All right, so, just speaking to the previous process and why there are so many households who have been overhoused for so long. So prior to the implementation of the choice-based system, overhoused households were able to choose specific buildings that they were willing to transfer to. Households sometimes chose buildings with very low turnover, resulting in no transfer offers ever being pushed to them, sometimes for many years. Households also had the ability to decline 3 offers before affecting their rent gear to income status. And this resulted in the backlog that we see. So the process itself, I'm just going to walk the committee through at a high level how the process works now, okay, how we are going to be implementing the process going forward. So an overhoused household is identified. Usually at an annual rent review, they update their household composition and they are deemed overhoused in our system. They are issued with a notice of decision as to their overhoused status, and they are able to request a review at that point. I'll talk about the review process in a minute. We meet with the tenants, so we will meet with overhoused tenants, all of those folks who are identified as overhoused in the system. The tenant service coordinators will meet with them and discuss what this means and how they need to participate in the process going forward. And then they are placed on the centralized waiting list. And this is the TCHC component of the process. And I'll hand it over to Jen to speak to the city process.
So once a household is placed on the centralized wait list, they do need to select 5 wards in Rent Cafe of areas of the city that they want to live. And then at that point, they participate in our expression of interest process. So they have, there's a 12-month mandatory participation period. We are expecting within those 12 months, households will receive an offer that they have bid on, that they are interested in, and will move. If at any time they refuse an offer, the provincial one offer rule does kick in. And so there could potentially be an impact. So lots of communication required in explaining the process to households who are participating. If they do not bid or do not accept an offer in the 12-month participation period, there is one final matching done. So it is a matching that the city will do based on their ward preference. So they will get an offer and it is essentially their last chance. If they refuse that offer, a household will then be issued by TCHC a loss of eligibility. And at that point, there is another opportunity for review through the City of Toronto Review Panel. So the City of Toronto reviews all of the loss of eligibility notices, all of the decisions of loss of eligibility throughout the social housing system.
What would the timeline be for that, realistically?
So it's I mean, the 1 year starts kicking in once someone has made their selection, their ward selections in Rent Cafe. So, I mean, we're hoping that that TCH can allocate some resources to getting people on. We've done a test run, and Lindsay can talk about that. That went quite well, which was like a kind of test group to have people enter into Rent Cafe and into the system. So, I mean, I don't know how long it will take to get folks on Rent Cafe, but the 1 year period does kick in once households have made their selections. Another thing to note, if they don't select wards, wards will be selected for them. So we're not getting held up by people not making decisions.
I just think, no, people that have, if it's over 8 years, if it's 10 years and you've been living somewhere overhoused, you're going to be far more resistant than somebody who's new and overhoused. So starting with the people that are most entrenched, maybe, I know it seems like a logical place to start, but I don't know if, and this is the TCH question, how TCH would then tell everybody in the 2,100 units. Basically, housed, and we're going to make a change for you. You can make this quickly, or we can come, put like that. So I think there may be more action more quickly, because isn't the idea here to get people overhoused out of their big units, so people that need those bigger units can move in? So just figuring out the tenant population, how to get people moving, rather than those who are really going to resist.
Yeah, and we agree. I think that in the joint work we've been doing, the city and TCHC, we've really been focused on how to get the message clearly out to all of the households, and then to focus on segments. So that's great advice, and I think we'll take that back and look at it.
And can I just ask this, this is a Nadia question. I mean, everybody, all the local TSCs, everybody in the community knows who those units are. That letting everybody know directly this is starting. Not everybody, because they're not all over house, but that to me makes a lot of sense. Some people might just want to not get any hassles and get to the top of the front of the list to get what they want. Start it moving.
So through the chair, all of the overhoused households would have understood they were overhoused in the annual review process. We do have a communication strategy specifically to the 2,100 households. To speak to your point, I do think I'll work with Lindsay and Jen to figure out whether we can reprioritize. Because we also want to ensure that we have the administrative capacity to upload the files and support the tenants. But I do agree with you that it may be easier, and I don't think chronology is the only factor. There may be individual households that are ready to go now. So Lindsay, you just have to map that out in terms of how we move forward.
Absolutely. So just to speak quickly to the reviews and exceptions that are possible in the process, tenants can request, as we said, a review of their notice of decision, which is that review is undertaken by TCHC. And at the loss of subsidy point, that review is undertaken by the city's housing secretariat. Tenants can also request an exception through the request for additional bedroom. So if they say, I actually need the bedrooms that I have, and it falls under the rules outlined in the legislation and the RGI administration manual, then they may stay in their unit if it's approved, as well as they can request an addition to household, again, governed by other rules that are in place for all households.
I'm just coming back to this because 2,100 apartments with not enough people in it is a serious issue. TCHC has a very good track record when it comes to moving tenants and redevelopments. And some people want to go right away. No problem. I'll sign the NCT, I'll find a spot on it. Other people are very resistant to moving. And so I'm just back on this one because I think and I think this should, I don't know if this is going to the board or not, but we need to kind of have a target thinking how many of those 2,100 overhoused apartments will we try to get done quickly? What, rather than start, what's that look like? What's the plan for that, Mr. Chair? To come back with something very clear. Is it 200? Is it 100? Is it 500? Where's the low hanging fruit to get these folks right sized and get these units opened up for people that need that size unit?
So
I don't feel the pressure in this report.
Right.
So through the chair, we are scheduled to come back on February 15th at the board meeting. I think we can come back with a clearer action plan in terms of timelines and what our anticipated targets are in 2024. So we will be bringing this back in 10 days, and I think we can address the questions as well as the original question around how many households in which age category. So we can bring those both back on the 15th.
So if I may, I have a question, somewhat related to what Councilor Fletcher has said, and that is, Lindsay. So there is a provision if somebody's RGI and they're overhoused. What if somebody's market and they're overhoused?
So overhoused only exists for RGI. The system.
How is it, why is that? Couldn't you have a market rent person in a 3-bedroom that's, only using 2 bedrooms?
Potentially, yes, yeah. But the priority in the system is for RGI households.
Because the city's the service manager for all RGIs, and the city's saying to everybody who has RGIs, right size your RGIs.
In other words, you're already getting a deal, you're not gonna get even a better deal by having too many bedrooms. Whereas if you're market rent, you're paying.
Yeah, I think the focus is the service manager, not, this isn't an independent exercise. We want to do that, but right now, it's the.
Oh, sorry, carry on with your presentation.
Almost done. So the process to clean up this backlog has been planned in collaboration with the city. Began rolling out last year with a very small pilot, a cohort of 150 households. And they have been moving through the system well. And we can include some data when we come back to the board with respect to those 150 households and how that pilot group has gone. We're proposing to add the remaining households to Rent Cafe over the next several months, beginning with households that have been overhoused for the longest. If they do not fully participate in the system, they will wait out their 12 months for the one offer stage. But as has been discussed at this table and as part of the plan on our end is to be quite active in engaging with those tenants, encouraging them, demonstrating their options. They really will move quickly if they participate in the Rent Cafe choice-based system. Because of the nature of the priorities that they have, if we can work with them to help them understand all the options, seniors housing, other housing providers within TCHC, to really think about the benefits of that move, then they can move quite quickly.
That's a question.
Uba, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I just have a couple quick questions. The first one is in terms of someone who's overhoused selecting a unit, and now that we have the one offer, do they go through the cycle that comes every 2 weeks to select, and they're only offer through that, or there's an internal process? My second question is, and we have priority for every other aspect of the transfer, whether it's SPP, whether it's crisis, accommodation, overhouse, but there are a lot of challenge and a lot of frustration in terms of not having a priority for underhouse. I see cases where a family of 10 or like 8 kids and mom and dad are cramped in 2-bedroom, and that's not even aligned with the city's policy in terms of how many people can reside in 1 bedroom. So how are we mitigating that? What are the plans? Are we thinking about that? That's my second question. Thank you.
The first one. So I can answer the first question on Rent Cafe. So people will participate in the system the same way that a new applicant does, which is to bid on units that they are interested in moving into. And so so the one offer rule will apply, but only to units that they have made a bid and have been offered.
And then with respect to the underhouse priority, we are definitely hearing that loud and clear through our tenant consultations as well, with respect to changes to our transfer policy. So we will be speaking with, consulting with the members of this committee as to get their feedback on changes to the transfer policy. And we can talk through that and the importance of that underhoused category and how that could be addressed. So it'll come forward, and that's happening in the next couple of months. The proposed changes to the transfer policy.
Representative?
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. It's not so much of a question, but a comment. And some of the challenges that I find with people who are transferring, even though we do see the need of doing so, is community supports. So I find that when some people are moving and they have to transfer, is what is TCHC doing to help with the community support? So if there's like a health center that they normally go to, what are those supports? And then once they transfer, what is TCHC going to do to help them integrate within that community? Because obviously everything is going to be new, new routines that they have to create, and just get more acquainted with that community. So those are, I guess, considerations to consider when we're trying to make sure that everyone is equally housed, but maybe there's the resistance of the reasons why people don't want to move right away. And a lot of it is just the community supports that they're getting from their current community that they might not see in that one.
Thank you for the question, Director, or the comment, Director Ferrer, and through the chair. We absolutely agree with you. We try in all cases where we can to move individuals to locations that are closest to their current home where possible, which is why we give the 1-year period to give a variety of offers to the tenant. In cases where tenants do have to move outside of their households, we have in the past connected them to their local CSC, Community Service Coordinator, to provide any necessary supports. And we try to work really closely with the engagement team as well to provide as much information to that household. So we saw some of that with the Swansea transfers, for example, because we had to move a lot of individuals and move them away from their homes quickly. And so what we did was we worked with a local team that was receiving the tenancy to ensure that there was local support provided, but noted, and we do that at the front end as much as we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up. The next slide is just highlighting some risks, and I think that this conversation has sort of highlighted a number of those risks. I'll just emphasize again that we are really focused on that communication with households, and I really appreciate the feedback from this committee around targets and needing to identify which households we can move quickly and how we can speed things up. So appreciate the request for urgency on this file. We agree.
Yeah, and I'll just close out by saying that the city intends to continue to work in partnership with TCHC to monitor, adjust the plan as necessary. And again, to state, our goal is housing stability for TCHC households, to ensure that they participate in the process. And again, to ensure that there is housing available for folks on the centralized wait list.
Thank you both for your presentation, for your work. Other questions from committee members? I've got a couple of things. So do we help the tenants with their move? Either like, if you're moving, let's say you've chosen to move from, these are people on RTI, moving can be kind of expensive. Do we lend a hand in any way?
So that's not something we currently have budgeted for. Certainly other supports around the moving process, through the CSCs, as Nadia identified. But that's where it stands right now.
I don't know if there's ever been any consideration to providing, a month's free rent for the move as an enticement to move somebody along, a little bit more quickly. If you move within 3 months, maybe you get 2 months free rent, you move within a month, et cetera, a little bit. Money always is a good incentive, right? So, and that might be something that might not be, turn out to be that costly for somebody on RGI. So just something to think about. And so do we only find out if somebody's overhoused when we do the annual unit review?
So,
and how do we actually do that? Because, you could say, Jimmy's living in bed, right? Like there's his clothes and there's his shoes, right? Or how do you know?
So we look to tenants to identify to us when they have an addition to their household. They are required to do that whenever it happens in year. Often it happens at the annual rent review, but there is an obligation for tenants to inform, our rent geared to income tenants to inform TCHC when they have additions or removals from their household.
But there's no incentive for them to do that.
Well, the rent would be the incentive, because if someone has somebody on there as part of their household, then their income would need to be included in the rent calculation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And, we talk about the loss of eligibility for RTI not being an eviction notice. But essentially, we don't do eviction, but essentially, if we're taking away the RTI, it almost is an eviction notice. Because you're looking at somebody who might be paying $300 or $400 a month, so all of a sudden, he has to be paid $1,200 or $1,500. Fair enough.
So through the chair, if we are going through the arrears eviction process, that probably adds another year plus to the process. We would have to work through OACH. We would have to try and establish a repayment agreement. So they would essentially enter our arrears collection process. We have had individuals that have opted to pay market rent instead of leaving. We've also identified individuals, to Jen's point, where there are additional individuals in the household. They just were not included in the annual review. And so there are times where individuals add members of the household that may not have been included in the annual review, who recently moved in, so that they can maintain their unit. So the outcome isn't always the individual moving. There are mitigating circumstances we can put in place. And as I've mentioned, there's been instances where, for example, a senior living in a 2-bedroom, their children that live outside of the home have supplemented to keep that individual in the unit, right? So if they do go up to market rent, they retain the unit.
I see. Just before I go, I just have one last question. So there's sort of a 30-day appeal process that you refer to in the report. And does that happen often?
A request for review. Yes, it does. And it happens at 2 points in the process. One, when they receive the notice of decision, and then also at the end, at loss of eligibility. And it is something tenants do take advantage of on a fairly regular basis, I would say.
Yeah, and the city is flexible on the timeline, so we will hear a review of someone who applies past the deadline if in fact, we feel it's a housing stability issue. Sometimes people don't quite understand how it works.
I guess what percentage are reviewed? 50, 60,
That's an excellent
10?
question. I can bring that back at the board. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Councillor Fletcher, you have any other further
No, I
questions?
just think that,
Comments or?
I do, because if you're in a 3-bedroom, there's a rent for that 3-bedroom. And if you only have one, you're using 1 bedroom, you're paying, I guess your subsidy, I'm not sure if you're subsidized for the 1-bedroom or the 3-bedroom, but a 3-bedroom apartment is more expensive than a 1-bedroom apartment. So you really have some pressure to come up. You're not getting RGI dollars for that. You'd have to pay the rest yourself. But, anyway, people that are really socked in at 10, 11, 12 years, they're going to be very hard to move. People that have been there for 2 years are not going to be so hard to move. But I would think that there are folks living there and their caretakers and everybody else, they kind of know. They know who's underhoused there or overhoused. And so moving people in on your lease in order to stay that aren't real, all those kinds of things. I mean, tenants want to stay where they are. I get that. You want to live where you are. But we're in a housing crisis. And we have people that have large families that can't live properly. So I guess that's the piece where I think we just need to be a little sharper and think who's going to be easy to move and who's hard to move.
Yeah.
Somebody who's been to the Oaks 5 times is not going to be an easy person to deal with, right? So it's just that we know how tenants work. So I would really want you to come back with, here's a plan, here's the percentage that we're reviewing. So there's 50%, that's a much longer road than quickly moving people out. And you've done your pilot with, in the pilot, how many moved within the time frame that you'd like? I don't know, you didn't tell us.
Yeah,
You
you can
know.
bring, we can bring that information. We'll do a dive on that 150 and bring that when we come to the board. Absolutely.
Can someone who has who is overhoused, do they have the option of bringing in, somebody to sublet the room? Like a boarder?
They're not able to sublet. They do, have an ability to have a roommate.
Yeah, roommate or a boarder or something, that's, yeah.
So I can speak to that. In rent care to income, anyone who lives in the household becomes part of your RGI household. So for the purposes of rent calculation. So someone, if you're in RGI housing, you can't charge a set rate for a room because that person's income would need to be included in your rent calculation.
Any further questions from committee members? No? Okay, thank you all very much. We'll have a motion to receive the information. Moved by Debbie Douglas, want to move that? Thank you, Debbie. All in favor? That's received. And then on the next item, we have deputies.
I think we've got 2 and first is mutual consent.
Oh, the first is Ms. Williams. Okay. Good morning again, Catherine.
No, that was an interesting conversation, just saying. Very helpful. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about this, the protocols for the community safety incidents. On the workflow, a lot of those serious incidents are criminal in nature, and there's no indication, that they would likely be referred to Toronto Police Services because it's beyond the scope of work for CSU to manage. Now, on the appendix page, where we talked about the incident classifications, this is exactly what I was speaking to earlier. We've never seen this list. And these are the kinds of incidents that are taking place in our communities every single day, and we're not really discussing them. Now, the Community Safety Advisory Committee, its primary focus has been discussing the violence reduction program, and keeping in mind that's a temporary committee. that we know of. So, I mean, it would be helpful to have statistics around the frequency of these, isolated incidents and how we're responding to them. Is it just by sending them a tenancy management letter? Or does CSU attend in person when the incident occurs or after the fact? Breach of lease, the number of files and for what incidents that are referred to the landlord and tenant board, and what are the outcomes? So were tenants evicted as a result of that process? Like, we don't know. This information would enable the committee to familiarize themselves with the issues our tenants face and whether our current approach is enabling us to manage and reduce antisocial behavior in our communities. The number of vulnerable tenants living in Toronto community housing, as we all know, continues to grow. Often, a serious incident is what triggers Toronto Housing in identifying a tenant who may be in need of additional supports. Over time, Toronto Community Housing is evolving into a supportive housing provider, as some tenants require ongoing assistance and supervision to maintain their tenancy, whereas social housing tenants are expected upon lease signing to be able to live independently and comply with their lease obligations. Timelines to address antisocial behavior with tenants, vulnerable or otherwise, is a very lengthy process. As a result, while the process is being investigated and pursued, other tenants in the community are subjected to ongoing disruption, harassment, and behaviors, which is actually contrary to Toronto Housing's obligation to ensure peace and enjoyment for all tenants. So it's challenging for us to manage these behaviors. I'm not sure what a soft landing supports are. In the old days, it was a token and a phone number. So it might be helpful. Perhaps the committee knows what a soft landing is. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputy? Okay, seeing none. We have the next deputy. Hassan Bayan. Hi.
Thank you. So I will speak about the tenancy management protocol for community safety tenant incidents. I will just comment on a few points. First of all, corroboration of incidents, CCTV camera footage. My comments like this: some special constables don't check the CCTV cameras. When we report against some tenants or non-tenants who live in the building, social, they don't even check the camera. For example, some people, they put coin in the lock in the entrance room, the entrance of the buildings. And it is open from 10 or 11 p.m. till 8 a.m. in the morning. Anyone can enter. We don't know who's going to enter. This is happening for several months. This antisocial behavior. The offenders are jeopardizing our security all night and every night till the morning. There are many tenants doing illegal activities all night in the building, from drug dealing to trafficking in sex women, bringing people to stay one night or more and take money from them. These tenants work together, open the door all night to receive the clients. The special constable tell us, like, I don't have time to check the camera, or I don't know, or it's very hard to catch the camera. I should check. I have to report it to their supervisors in order to come and check. And we want to know who are there, because we want the evidence in order to stop this behavior. I don't want, I am not looking for eviction for anyone, just please stop risking us all night. That's it. Other point, necessary action on the part of special counsel, enforcement of Provision Offences Act. Drug dealing is an offense against the law and need action from law enforcement officers. However, special constable tell us that they cannot catch the drug dealers and offenders of the illegal activities in our building. They cannot enforce the law because offenders are very smart. I don't believe that they are very smart. Special constables receive good training, and if not, please train them more. Tell us we can give them tips how to catch. Just please, it's many years, and a lot of people become victims and they take the drugs at the beginning for free, and then they become addicts. Then they start to ask for money, and what they are doing is they go to the TSC, they beg for money. They stand up in the intersection, they beg for money, or the woman has to work for this. Then, because of the drug dealers, selfish people, they don't want to study, they are lazy, they don't want to use their mind. I jump now to the second section titled Workflow, Tenancy Management and the Social Behavior. There is a link in the workflow between the ongoing behavior, the second column, and the further investigate in the third column. My comments, there's no investigation for many years for the same people who are violating the law in our building. There's ongoing issues, drug offenses, drug dealers, people who are not on the lease, live in a specific apartment in our buildings for several months or several years. I'm not against peaceful people, but the people who make troubles and others who maliciously activate false alarm system. What encourages also the social behavior is the superintendents are not cooperating, are not reporting. That's why they are punished. So this is last thing by 30 minutes regarding the dog and dog owners liability act. I believe the solution is soundproofing. I have engineering. We are solution find soundproofing some apartments, whether from TCHC or Tenant, if you want, or find solution between both of them, because some people, they like dogs, they like their pets, and they are very emotionally supported by them. Soundproofing is a good solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pyatt, for your question. Just one moment. What the counselor and some of the other, they might have a question for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, you can sit down if you'd like, if it's at, hold the microphone down closer to you, there, maybe more comfortable. Are you saying that dogs are barking? Is that what's happening, or they're just there?
No, they bark, but this is their behavior. This is their, we cannot change them. So the solution is soundproofing.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm just asking if it's barking, because you really can't have your dog barking all day. And is there a particular building you want to tell us about?
I live in 40 Fair Valley Court, Scarborough South Street.
Which one?
40 Fair Valley Court.
Oh, Fur Valley.
I go to your staff in the summertime, but because our counselor changes, so it's very complicated.
Yes, it's complicated. He's going to be on this. So that's very helpful for me to know where you have concerns from. Thank you.
Starbucks.
I know that place. It's on Kingston Road, right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I've asked it many times. Thank you very much.
And I have a question too. How often we have, how often you call the CSU to come to the building?
I don't call every day. I call every several days. Whenever I go down, because in the past they used to put the coin at 7 to 8 p.m. Now, because I reported and the supervisor Gary, I met with them and he checked. They checked the camera and special constable, they didn't check the camera. The other supervisor checked the camera and told me, yeah, we find the person and got it. So we come yesterday, now they are put it like 12, 9, 1. So when I'm sleeping, I find it in the morning.
Have the police ever come to the building?
The police, I told the police, In the past, they told me, sorry, we cannot help you. This is scratching that. It is about Toronto University.
I see. Okay.
So this is why they don't ever patrol the name, but they don't patrol. This is Toronto University, don't want.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the update.
Is there any question?
Any other questions from directors? No. Thank you, Mr. Fair.
Thank you. I have another one for later.
Okay. Sorry, we're just going to carry on with the committee work for a minute. On this particular item, are there questions from committee members?
There's a presentation.
Yeah.
Well, this is a presentation.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Oh, that's Captain.
Thank you, Chair Campbell. So the following presentation is in response to inquiries from the November 27th TSC meeting, shedding light on the partnership between tenancy management and the community safety unit in addressing antisocial behavior and highlighting the collaborative approach between these departments. Whilst CSU engagement may be initiated at various points if deemed necessary based on individual case specifics, it is essential to emphasize that our regional teams always lead in tenancy management matters. The CSU's role is to support tenants and assist the tenancy management team when necessary. Our priority is to resolve issues through tenancy management with a focus on preserving the tenancy where possible while working to preserve the safety of the whole community. The tenancy management team has staff resources that can be deployed to support tenants who are in crisis and require connections to community agency supports. I'll hand it over to John Karlchevic, the general manager in the central region, and David Quigley, the manager of community safety, to walk us through the next few slides.
Community safety for CSU.
Yes, so David Quigley is the manager in the community safety unit that supports this process.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is John. I am one of 3 general managers. I'm the general manager for the central region. To my right is David Quigley. I'll let David introduce himself.
Good morning. My name is David Quigley. I'm the manager of business planning and support with the community safety unit.
I was just thinking, we've never seen a general manager here before the committee. We're just thinking that the other day, so welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to see a general manager in the flesh.
Thank you.
Maybe he's just an AI.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. If we could just move the presentation up to the next slide. I believe it has the flow chart. I'll just be speaking to the flow chart. But first, I'd like to hand it over to David Quigley that will speak to the community safety unit and how they help us manage tenancies.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'll try to give a high-level overview of community safety's call response process, and then I'll hand it back to John Karlchevic to speak to the good work our folks and operations do with regards to tenancy management. So as you may be aware, the community safety unit receives calls for service from a number of different avenues. They could come through our community safety call center, which we will refer to as dispatch, may come from a regional office, a hub office, the solutions team, or many other points within TCHC. But once our community safety officers become aware of a call for service or someone requiring assistance, they would attend that location, engage with the involved parties, conduct an investigation if necessary, provide assistance, support. If appropriate, they may lay a provincial or criminal charge in relation to any social or criminal activity. They will also, where appropriate, seek to make internal and external referrals where there are resources to address tenant and other individual needs going forward that may be beyond the capacity of the community safety unit. Once the officer is done providing that assistance, one of their key accountabilities is to document on behalf of TCHC. The officers will complete an incident report. They will forward that on to their supervisors who, when they've reviewed it for quality assurance purposes, will then pass the report on to our community safety advisors. Our community safety advisors are the folks within community safety unit who have the closest touch points on a daily basis with our counterparts in the operations division. So our community safety advisors will look at reports and try to see if there were any trends or patterns which may justify establishing ongoing controls to address the behavior, potentially making recommendations towards pilots or initiatives that may address the behavior. But ultimately, when they're through with their review exercise, they'll create a Holmes record of that incident and forward it on to appropriate operations staff for follow-up. Now, depending on the severity of the incident will determine who the primary audience for a particular report is going to be. So if we have an isolated incident of a dog barking or a loud stereo, that report will be forwarded to the tenant services coordinator for their review and follow-up. Should we have something that was slightly more serious, say an assault or maybe noise bylaws that were ongoing and habitual, those would be escalated a little bit so that the tenant services coordinator and the tenancy supervisor had line of sight of the documentation CSU had forwarded. And then in our most severe cases where we're talking about serious violence or incidents impacting employee health, occupational health and safety issues, those would then be forwarded to line of sight for the general manager, the supervisor of tenancy management, the tenant services coordinator, and the manager of health and wellness at TCHC. So if it was necessary, they get engaged in employee safety planning. From there, we hand over to operations, and that's where their tenancy management process kicks in.
Thank you, David. So some of the categorization that David was referring to, so we have some.
Sorry, I just have a question. Are those community safety advisors special constables?
They're not.
So, but they're under your director, not under operations.
They fall
Who do they report?
to the community safety unit.
They report to CSU.
That's correct.
And who hires them?
TCHC Human Resources with TCH, Community Safety Leadership.
And how do they report to the COO?
So the community safety advisors report through a supervisor and a manager that reports up through Al Britton to me.
But community safety advisors could report in a different way. They're not CSU, they're not special constables, they just happen to be in that unit, correct?
That's correct.
That's right, so thank you very much.
They're civilians.
No, I understand, but they're managed by CSU. They're not special constables. They don't necessarily have to be managed by CSU. That's my question, and I've had it answered. They don't. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So some of the incidents that David was referring to and how they're managed, we have isolated incidents, ongoing issues, and serious violent incidents. Isolated incidents, causing disturbances, thefts, break-in enters, disputes. Some of the more serious violent incidents are also isolated, such as drug offenses. We take any guns, drugs, and serious assaults very seriously, and those are escalated straight up to the general manager for immediate action. Some of the more, there are also ongoing issues that we manage locally. There are some of the less serious incidents, such as noise disturbances could be, we heard dogs mentioned here earlier, where it could be something as simple as a call is made, the special constable attends, and it's that interaction with the tenant and that special constable that solves that issue. Sometimes they are escalated to the point that ticket in homes, which is created from that safety report, gets assigned to the tenant service coordinator, and whether that be a letter or whether it be a phone call or some kind of contact to that resident, letting them know that their actions are disturbing the reasonable enjoyment of the premises by the neighbors is some of the activities that we do on a daily basis. So the tenant service coordinator really is a key person. They connect with the site staff regularly. Our supers, our cleaners, our CMPs, they're the ones that are on the ground. They are the ones that know what's happening in the building. So we ensure that there's a constant communication between them, but also very important, and David mentioned it earlier, is the documentation process. So if we need to hold tenants accountable, we need that documentation to be accurate, and we need it to get to the people that use it to manage those tenancies. So the tenant service coordinators, they will gather information, they conduct tenancy management meetings where appropriate. If we are dealing with a more serious incident, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the face-to-face meeting isn't appropriate. We issue warning letters, we collaborate with internal or external stakeholders We regularly communicate with Toronto Police. The special constables in a lot of the neighborhoods are a great resource to us. We also consider whether the tenant is vulnerable and requires to be connected to one of our community service coordinators of access and support. They are the ones that would connect that tenant, whether it be to existing supports in the community. And we also identify incidents that may require legal services division. So we work very closely with our paralegals that are our key point of contact when we're preparing notice of terminations for those more serious incidents. When we're talking about our community service coordinator responsibilities, we're talking about connecting the tenants to the appropriate support agencies, referrals to the spider or focus table as well. We also sit on the spider and the 6 focus tables throughout the city. We collaborate with internal and external stakeholders. We work with tenants that may be displaced due to fires and floods. And we also connect tenants to soft landings and supports. And I heard a question earlier about soft landings. Soft landings are where we ensure that if we understand that that tenancy is not a tenancy that we can no longer maintain and we do have to go through eviction, that we have an agency or another support there for that tenant to access and not just refer to the shelter. Some of the times that we actually don't have that soft landing support is when we're dealing with guns, drugs, or serious assaults, where we need to ensure the safety of our staff when that eviction is taking place. So for tenancy management and general manager responsibilities, so we review the information about the incidents. We review the documented attempts for the tenant service coordinator and the community services coordinator, and ensure that we provide any feedback and recommendations on any actions taken. We provide support, update, and escalate on critical incidents. We also review all the files that go through the legal services. For a general manager, we determine the appropriate actions were taken on the incident, final sign off for legal services, and we also provide instructions to the legal services department. The paralegals that we work very closely with, they review the file. They would provide legal advice on risks and benefits. They would prepare the notice of termination and file at the landlord and tenant board. They provide the tenancy management pillar staff with updates on timing. If it's a notice for antisocial behavior where a tribunal application is done right away, they advise us of the avoiding periods. They attend the hearings at the landlord and tenant board. They identify parties that are required for the landlord and tenant board hearings, and they also file for the sheriff. The community safety unit, they already spoke to earlier. We work very closely with them throughout the entire process. If it's just an isolated incident, we would update them, but usually when there's ongoing incidents, there's additional calls that are into the community safety unit. And we meet regularly, we communicate often, and so I just wanted to provide that update to the group here today.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive review. Questions from committee members? Councilor Fleck.
Not a question, but this is why we're waiting for, the new model is something that we're looking at. Who does what? Safety, community safety advisors, tenancy management, and who's running the show for tenancy management. So it's still not even clear to me now. But at the end of the day, tenancy management is through COO, general managers, assistant general managers. So I'm unclear how, if they're under your direct report or if they're, I just don't want to get into the whole CSU review, but I want to say that tenancy management for on the ground, everybody who knows TCHC knows that supervisor there, caretaker, they all know who the problem tenants are. It's not a mystery who they are. So it's how you manage problem tenancies from small problems to big problems, which require CSU and or policing. The rest of it, everybody knows who they are. So we have a lot of layers to get to those listings of who they are. And I think we may be overcomplicating that in order to get quickly to those places. We also have our lists of places that we know are vulnerable, or violent, or just perfect places where people live, where I'm not assuming not much goes on. So I'd say thanks for the report, but we're still in the middle of that, and I'd like to know when our CSU review is coming back, because I'm extremely frustrated that it's not here.
So through the chair, I will answer the last question on that. So the CSU review is being led by the Social Development and Finance Administration at the city. They have reported through CSAP. I believe they're going to the next CSAP with an update, and the subsequent CSAP will have the review. So the consultants have been hired through the city, and they're actively working to set up interviews and do research as we speak. So the review is underway, and I think we can have further discussions at CSAP.
Okay, Dr. Ferrer, question?
Hi there. Questions, comments. I do echo Director Paul Fletcher's sentiment of how frustrating when it comes to safety of the community, and also the deputant who did speak about some of the incidents that he is experiencing or people in the community are experiencing as well. So I definitely, So when it comes to community safety, so I know that they talked about community safety advisors, and there was some clarification there of what the advisors are, or who they are and who they work for. But my question is, when you are receiving those calls and those complaints, and you mentioned that you have to identify trends, how long does it take for a community advisor, or does the department, how long does it take for them to identify what the current trends are in specific communities? And then what are the action plans when it comes to identifying those trends? If they could clarify that process for me, because I didn't really get it.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in response to the question of the director, thank you very much for the question. So our community safety advisors, they don't work weekends, they do work traditional business hours. So what they do is they review the reports on a daily or business daily basis. And through that is when they start beginning the identification process. Now, many of these result in more identification of hotspots within communities that can be quickly turned around within about 1 or 2 days to make a recommendation for a directed patrol, which means we're now assigning CSU personnel on a particular frequency to attend a hotspot to address activity that's going on. To speak to larger community issues, many of the trends there would be identified through a community safety audit process. Those are a little more inclusive. There has to be a community walk. We meet with stakeholders and tenants to discuss the community issues. And then there's also a CPTED, crime prevention through environmental audit, that goes along with those initiatives to try to improve or make recommendations to improve the built environment of the community to make areas less desirable to folks who may engage in any social activity. So for the second part of your question, unfortunately, I can't give you an exact timeline on how long it takes to turn around the particular initiatives and projects, but our community safety advisors do work with their supervisory team to make these recommendations regularly. Every day across the city, we see directed patrols being implemented to address lower level community safety issues. But some of the issues do require more advanced strategies, including involvement with the Toronto Police, and they could take some time to put together.
Thank you for that. So you talk about the tenant service coordinator following up with a tenant who has or is exhibiting antisocial behaviors. How about if the tenant is not compliant or is not picking up the phone calls or are not reading the letters? Like, what is the capacity of the tenant service coordinator to address the issues that's happening with these antisocial like what is the capacity for that?
I can take this question on. So the tenants, and you're correct, there are instances where we do not have tenants that are cooperating with us. So the tenant service coordinator actually has quite a few resources that they can call upon locally. Their site staff know their tenants. We've heard that here several times, and it is true. They also have supervisors that they can rely on. They also have the community safety advisors that they can call upon. We also partner quite a bit with agencies if we know that that certain tenant has a support, whether it be Front Victor, Loft, Coda. We have quite a few, and they are, as they do their normal duties when it's collecting the rent, managing the annual rent review, they actually get to know and they have a relationship, with the tenant, so they know best how to manage it and how to get that message across. They actually go and we do quite a few door knocks as well, where they go out, and they will knock on the door, not alone. They will always ensure that there is a second person with them. So they're quite good at connecting with that tenant. The ones that are a little bit more difficult, we just ensure that those attempts are made. And then we continue to manage that tenant as we're allowed under the rules of the Tenant Protection Act. And when we say, a notice of termination served, the notice of termination is served not with the intent of getting to eviction. Notice of termination is also served to change behaviors. It's also served to put people on notice. Because unfortunately, often some people find letters and other calls not serious, but when you get a notice of termination served to you, it brings that relationship to a different level. So with the lower, I shouldn't say lower, but with incidents of, ongoing disturbances, we will work with that tenant and we'll continue to work as much as possible. But if that behavior does not change and it keeps impacting the neighborhood and the neighboring tenant, we're really left no other alternative but to serve that notice of termination. But that does not mean that we do not attempt to work out or work with that tenant to change those behaviors. To ensure that they're not impacting their neighbors right up until the date of eviction, if it goes that far. The only time, again, and I mentioned it, is we're very careful when there's any incidents to do with drugs, guns, or serious assaults. We ensure that, we connect that tenant to supports, but we ensure that the staff safety is first and foremost when we're providing support.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members? So we heard it from Mr. Fayed in his deputation that there's an ongoing, so we heard about your process and protocols. And then Mr. Fayed had indicated now there seems to be an ongoing problem with security in his building that he believes is as a result of drug dealing. And it doesn't seem to be dealt with effectively. Can you comment on that? I mean, I know it's difficult to comment on something you're not intimately familiar with, but he's made the trouble to come here and make his deputation, and I think it sounds fairly serious to me. Nadia, did you want to take a step?
I'm gonna pass it, but I'm gonna start it. So absolutely, we take building safety very seriously. The specific examples around some of the comments Mr. Fayed had heard from special constables, if they were said and certainly communicated in that way, they were unacceptable to us. It's not appropriate to say we're too busy or we don't have time to do that. So I will absolutely be working with CSU on that. Al, you're online. Can I ask you to comment on this? And then David, if you want to expand with more specifics. Al Britton is the Senior Director of the Community Safety Unit.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Nadia, and through the chair, the community safety unit tries to ensure that we fully respond to all matters. Unfortunately, there are instances where people, don't thoroughly do their job, and those are instances we would like our supervisory team to be made aware of, that we can look into them and address. We believe those are very few compared to the high number of instances our staff deal with, but unfortunately, they do occur. And in the case of someone that's not satisfied with the performance of one of our special constables, we do have supervisors in the field 24/7, as well as we have an on-duty manager that can be contacted at any time through our dispatch center. So I would, in the moment, I would ask that be done, that our supervisors and managers be contacted. In the long term, we'll definitely reach out to the deputant and try to resolve the issues the best we can.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the response. And Councilor Blank.
Just a couple more questions, because this committee, we've heard about cameras, and that at a certain point, the general manager's staff weren't able to access those to see immediately what was going on. What's the status now? Does it have to come back from CSU, or does on-site staff have the ability to review the camera footage?
So through the chair, currently general managers do have access to on-site footage, and they use it fairly frequently if needed. We are still working to roll out the access back to frontline staff. I think at the last TSC we committed to Q1 of 2024. So we are still finalizing that, but our commitment stays that we would like to ensure that it's restored by the end of Q1 of this year.
Just remind me why it was removed, that access.
So through the chair, and Al, you can elaborate on this. It's my understanding that there was an audit done, I believe in 2021 or 2020, that spoke to some security implications of having multiple staff accessing video footage. There was also a few incidents where staff had either shared the footage with individuals that they shouldn't have, or information was shared. And so one of the recommendations, and again, Al can speak to more specifics, was to actually look at the custody of the videos and ensuring that less staff had access to it to minimize risk. But we also recognized after the review that that wasn't helpful at a building level. And so that's why we're working to reverse that decision. Al, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Nadia. And through the chair, the community safety unit, obviously, when it comes to video, we want to ensure it's at the highest level of safety, because we do not want videos being posted online and et cetera. But we do understand the need for site staff to have it to be able to perform their duties. So one of the things we did do as part of the review of this process was seek legal advice in regards to the Municipal Privacy Information and Privacy Commission. And basically, it's kind of a gray area as far as how long it's to be made available. That's what we're trying to work out right now, the timelines. Our video is retained for a 14-day period at this point, and we're trying to ensure staff have it for that full period, but that's the only thing we're working through right now. But we do want site staff to have it for purposes of the performance of their duties.
So just to be clear, you did remove it from the site staff, CSU?
Yes, to be clear, it was removed
through
a joint decision of the CEO of the day and the senior director of the day, and the subsequent review, we will be reinstating it.
And when did the board ask to have it reinstated?
I'm sorry, I apologize, I missed part of that.
When was it asked? I think the board asked to have it reviewed and reinstated, kind of handcuffing our on-site staff. So when was that?
Dave Quigley is the one performing or conducting the review, so Dave could give the exact date. I would say it was early last year, but perhaps Dave could give you the exact date if he's available.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the best of my recollection, the initial request came at the November TSC meeting for the access to be restored through the board. Now, we had previous inquiries from QP staff to look into the issue prior to that. And since then, CSU has been working with internal stakeholders, including the other business units and legal, with a view of updating TCHC's corporate policies and procedures with regards to accessing the CCTV systems. And we are still hoping to move forward and implement access back to frontline staff by no later than the end of Q1 this year.
So you're telling me November 2023 was when a formal request was made to you?
I can tell you, Councillor, that that's the first time the request was brought to my attention.
Of your attention? Okay. Many times before that.
So through the chair, there were discussions held at the Tenant Services Committee, certainly in my tenure, so I would say at least the beginning of last year, so prior to November. The November discussion was in response to a briefing note that actually outlined our decision to return the access, but the discussion was commenced, I suspect, and Dara and team will help me after this, but either end of 2022 or early 2023. November wasn't the first time we had that discussion. We brought it back after doing some internal review to identify that we were in alignment and agreement that it needed to be returned.
I'd like to speak.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I just have to say this, and I don't know if Catherine Wilkinson's still there, but it was Catherine Wilkinson, former chair of this very committee, that brought to our attention that the ability of frontline staff to review the footage have been removed. So even in this case of Fir Grove, that on-site staff or next person up couldn't come to review that footage to see what had gone on. So that's been under discussion and pushing for a number of years in order to have this review and restore that ability, which makes the most sense. It does always come back to this issue for me, which is who is the lead in our community? And even this model here, to me, again, looks like CSU is the lead, and then eventually it gets to the general manager. That's what we'll hear, and I believe the CSU review, but the lead is CSU works for the system. The system doesn't work for the CSU. And I know that's a very abrupt way to put it, but that has been the feeling of many people, that we need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Those cameras were taken away by the former chief of the CSU and the former COO. And I think we need to restore our previous model as best as possible and use everybody in the descriptions and in the best way that we can use them, and be clear who's leading. So N4 and N5s, I don't believe they're given out by the CSU. They're given out by general manager up to the COO. N4 and N5s are things that you want to give somebody a leash correction, you give them an N4 and an N5. Sort yourself out, or we're taking this further. There's many different ways to do that. I find that in this model, which was implemented by previous staff, that what we've done is we've undermined the ability of those people who are responsible for those properties. That is the site supervisors, the caretakers, the general managers, to kind of have that global view of the property and get in who they need to assist. And let's be clear, when we're talking about drugs or guns or anything else, we're talking about Toronto Police Service, because our CSU can't arrest people. But that's an investigation that goes far beyond that. So I'm very happy that we're having this review. Ms. Pavea, I'm very happy to hear that the CSU review is coming back. I think decisions that were implemented by staff who are no longer here need a review, and that everything's coming together at the right time. You can tell I feel strongly about this, and I want to thank Ms. Wilkinson again for drawing this to our attention as a board, that this had changed, where site staff can no longer see, oh, so-and-so has been dumping mattresses. So-and-so, now what do you do for that, right? Those are the common kinds of things at a site that are about just site supervision, not always who's doing something wrong, but just to keep these properties in the best state of good repair possible. So I know I sound like a broken record, but just to let you know, I am a broken record, okay?
Has it all on tape, and we just
I could just replay that over and over. You've all heard it so many times. That's it.
All right, so on.
Just to the question on timing, the records that we've got at governance indicate that there was a request made to report back on the possibility of providing site staff with access to CCTV footage that was requested at the July meeting of the Tenant Services Committee, a briefing that was brought back in November.
But it wasn't the first time, Dara, that we heard about that.
No, but
We've heard many times about it. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the actual hard ask may have been then, but we heard about it many times. Our staff heard about it many times, because those deputations, and maybe Ms. Wilkinson, who's probably listening in, can send me the day she made that deputation the first time. I'm sure it wasn't July of 2023. In fact, I know it was before. So it took a while for everybody to get around on it, but I'm flagging that it was removed. Nobody told us.
Okay.
But thanks for the clarification.
Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for the presentation. Motion to receive the information report and presentation. Moved by Marcel. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, we've had somebody come in and ask me to get in relation to item 8C.
8C, which is what Juan like.
Right.
Okay, well, that's what we're here for. On the tenant complaints, we can do that.
Overhoused. Sorry, can you over that, if you want to make a deputation vote?
This is on the, item 8C on the tenant complaints update. Okay, thank you for coming. You're given 5 minutes. My name is George. Speak.
Can't hear you.
We have problem with whether what I complained long time ago, from the heater was coming in the radiators, they put in that water for our shower there and for drinking water. There is poison, they think that chemicals in the hatch with the radiators for long time, so it's dangerous for the person. Then in that building is around 10 empty apartments, what is not used, and I was saying it should be given to the veterans of the military and army because they're sleeping on the street, or to some mother with children, then they can move and survive this winter. In the meantime, those 3 buildings, it is 4 persons who have my identity and living there in that buildings with my identity, but I complain and they trying to kill me in the place. It is about my complaints. Then it has so many other complaints. There was that Somalian cleaner who was torturing me for 3 years, psychologically, physically, changing, poisoning my stuff in apartment. He fell down to the stairs and he accused me that I attacked him. I'm in the wheelchair.
So, sir, this discussion is on the staff report on tenant complaints. It's not really a forum for tenants to come forward with their complaints. Have you registered complaints that you felt haven't been listened to?
It was complained about the person who was cleaner in our building. He was doing nothing. He was messing with my Wi-Fi, with my telephone, with everything what he couldn't possibly do. He is Somalian, who is
And so, Jamal, did you report this to your tenant services coordinator?
Because this one, unfortunately, it's around Pleasant. This lady who say she is Paula also, but she is from Nigeria.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is we'll have staff engage with you and speak to you separately from the meeting. Because the way that this works is we have our meeting, we have an agenda, and deputies come forward to speak on items on the agenda. You have a very specific issue or number of complaints. And I think what we'll do is we'll have Sonia take all of your information, and then we'll have through the COO, we'll have staff get back to you and try to resolve your particular issues, okay?
My driver's license is stolen by that cleaner from
Right,
Commissioner.
Sonia's gonna get your name and your phone number and your address, and we'll have staff come back and see if they can help you out, okay?
By the way, those 3 buildings are already sold to the George Schutz 3D Arc. In time, it's moved to the but to the Jamaica. Okay. A lot of capital procedure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your dedication. On the report, any questions or comments? Could I get a motion to receive the report, please, from, Debbie, can you make a motion to receive the report, please?
I move the report be accepted as received.
All in favor? Okay, great, thank you. That is received. And now we have the last item on the public agenda, which is item 8D. And that is the tenant engagement refresh. And we have a couple of deputations. And Mr. Fayette, I understand you would like to talk about the tenant engagement report. Okay?
Thank you.
So please proceed, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So it's just 1 minute. So, tenant engagement refresh day.
Sir, could you just stay close to the microphone? Nice.
Thank you very much. So the tenant engagement refresh day, the background section in the document include a plan for many steps and action for engagement. And this include tenant action table at the regional level, tenant advisory committee, regional for you, citywide tenants for you, many steps and meetings. And I attended as a representative many engagement in meetings. However, on the ground, in many buildings, it is hard to achieve any tenants engagement. Not because tenants don't want, or representatives don't. It is because of the obstacles in front of us. For example, superintendents are very strong to the degree that they limit their representative power to do anything in the building. Just the superintendent, in spite that, the more engagement, the more our communities are safe, secure, and developed. So we want more engagement to decrease the need for more security measures. Another obstacle, the drug dealers themselves, the gangs, who have full control of our buildings, and no one stops them. The police, security, management, no one. The gangs are negative. They don't want any positive engagement. They don't want any positive change. They want neither development nor constructive tenants relationship. One more obstacle is related to the common space, the recreation room, in order to engage the tenants. There's no possibility for us to use the recreation room for capacity buildings and to mobilize tenants, despite that we are enthusiastically willing to serve our communities and to dedicate our time for it. To use the recreation room, we need to sign a very strict 44 pages agreement that has very hard financial and legal requirements. We are low-income tenants living on food banks, struggling to survive in our life. We are in daily work and speaking. And TCHC asks us to pay from our very tiny pockets for any damage from injury. Ask us to pay for buy liability insurance for $5 million in case of risk change. Money. I propose, as other proposed, co-sign TCHC partners to take a financial liability insurance company because they have a financial capacity. Now I will move to the sorry. Now I will move to the last page and the paragraph implications and risk. I will comment on opportunities for tenants input on capital plans, operation budget, and setting local spending priorities. I want to know when we can start putting our input. Is it in 2004? Sorry, is it in 2004 or not? Especially, we are more interested of the spending on the local buildings level for more financial transparency. We don't want corruption. The last thing I want to mention is I'm asking for giving us as a representative the right to participate in choosing the organizations that TCHC partner with them in our government. I'm a representative and no one consulted me with anything about TCHC. Organization, partner who work in our buildings. There are organizations like TNG, the neighborhood group, the neighborhood organization TNO, and others who have full integrated comprehensive package for the development of the neighborhoods in the city of Toronto, from capacity building to community development, employment services, skills development and training, wellness programs, child, youth, and family programs.
Mr. Fayette, I can give you another 20, 30 seconds.
These strong, experienced organizations that are working in the different neighborhoods in the city of Toronto can help improve our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Are there any questions of the deputy? Okay, we'll see you. Next deputy is Catherine Wilkinson. On item 8D, Catherine.
Oh, yes, thank you again. So on the tenant engagement refresh, the mandate for this committee is overseeing design, implementation, reporting of policy strategies, initiatives by management, community relations, tenant communications, and engagement, and reporting and making recommendations to the board on these matters. So I understand the ELT removed the tenant engagement system, tenant volunteer policy from the tenant services 2024 work plan. It was previously on the work plan for last June. It's disconcerting that the ELT can remove items that were agreed upon by board members that are within the committee's mandate. At minimum, as a courtesy, the policy and accompanying procedures should have been provided to this committee for their information, as the engagement model is approved by the board. The optics that this policy is for management to manage and tenants to live by, but not necessary for board members to see, does not sit well. For the first time in our history, we now have a tenant volunteer policy that applies to the formal tenant engagement system. There are other areas where they're outside the model. I do not support the notion that regions working with tenant volunteers establish divisional specific policies and procedures to govern how they engage with tenant volunteers. I'm the first one to say that one size fits all is not always the answer, and exceptions may be necessary. Surely, we can create a standard community volunteer template to ensure consistency, fairness, and access to all tenants, and apply this lens to whatever the activity may be, with the understanding if there are situations outside that template, the tenants can vote to add additional guidelines tailored to their community. Consider creation of a tenant advisory committee, TAC, referral process to ensure that the primary focus is on reviewing the tenant engagement system and their ability to prioritize corporate issues that warrant their attention. For example, the deputation policy is slated to be referred to TAC. Now, our board members were not present in the early days when we discussed this. So TAC members did not know what a board of directors was, or the responsibility of directors, or that tenant directors existed. They have never heard of the deputation policy and weren't aware that tenants could speak before the board. Within that scenario, I do not see specifically how TAC members can add value in reviewing that policy. I would recommend that tenant policy consultations do not need to be duplicated by coming to TAC, as members can participate in the public consultations. So I have 4 recommendations. Provide the committee members with our first ever tenant volunteer policy and the 2 procedures. 2, determine if the tenant volunteer policy and procedures should remain part of the tenant service committee's work plan. 3, create a standard community volunteer template for tenant engagement activities outside the formal model. And 4, consider creation of a TAC referral process. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions of the deputy?
Could you just explain a little bit what a TAC referral process is, please?
Catherine, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did, Councillor Fletcher. Well, for instance, the deputation policy, it's just been automatically being sent to TAC. And as I've discussed with you, I'm not sure the relevance or the value that can be added by sending it to TAC. So, you know, prioritizing the engagement system review and corporate items that warrant TAC's attention over public policy consultations. So that's what I'm suggesting. And so then TAC, and we're working on this, can create a work plan and plan their year ahead, much like the board does and committees do, and know what's on the horizon and prepare, because items seem to be popping up and I hear about them. I don't see them on an agenda. I don't know where they fit or when they're coming or if they're coming. So it'd be really helpful just to have some structure with TAC to know what's on their work plan in the year ahead. This is a 2-year limit for this committee, the existing one, I believe. And so once this committee is done, there'll be new members that would carry on if the work is not completed.
Okay, I'm going to ask about TAC. Is that one?
Okay. Thank you for your deputation. No other, any other questions from committee members? Okay. All right, seeing none. Questions of staff on the item? Councillor Fletcher.
I just want to go back to, because I may have a different understanding of it than Ms. Wilkinson, but that TAC, the Tenant Advisory Committee, has been set up in order to assist senior leadership in policy development in certain areas. And in particular, it's modeled after the one of the seniors, which Mr. Hunter would know very well, and I was on the seniors board to ensure that the senior staff became a permanent fixture, not just to set up the seniors corporation. But I don't see it as something that's creating its own work plan. It's there to get advice on bigger issues. I must say I'm a little surprised to hear that the members don't know anything about tenants' roles at the board or anything of that nature. So obviously there needs to be some education there. But can we just establish the parameters, the kind of role of the TAC, please?
So through the chair, the Tenant Advisory Committee is a joint-led committee, both through the city as well as TCHC. It is to provide input, advice, consultation related to your point around corporate policy. It's also a really good opportunity for staff, and not necessarily just operations staff, but other divisions to bring forward policy where we think it would be helpful to have tenant input. So you'll know that future state, for example, the tenant human rights policy, the tenant deputation policy, and other policies where we think it's advantageous to have tenant input has been tabled at TAC. There is a bit of a strategy in place, I believe, with the city to look at a full year plan, because there's quite a few items that were suggested to go to TAC. We also have a group of tenants and staff who meet to set the agendas. I don't know if Ms. Wilkinson's on that group, but all of the agendas for TAC go through that group. So there isn't a formal work plan, but I do know that there's items that have been scheduled up until, I believe, June at this point. So Tom and
Thank you.
So a tenant survey that we do regularly, is that not something that TAC would give good advice on the best way to do that? How deep it should go, look at the models in order to have a group of engaged tenants to give advice that, and tenants that have the authority from the board to do that. It's not, although forget how many we added on through the city.
Through the chair to the council. So I think that's spot on in terms of the experience with the seniors tenant advisory committee is it would be something like a tenant survey, and there was policies around the tenant engagement and the use of space in the Toronto Seniors Corporation that all rolled through the stack, and at appropriate times reviewed those policies and provided advice. And so it's really dynamic in terms of how that work happens. But I think that the primary fact is that these key policies that affect tenants have the opportunity to be reviewed and commented by the TAC or stack. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other committee members have questions, comments? Director Ferrer?
Hi. First off, I want to thank the board or the people who are working with the tenant advisory committee for always including me in those conversations. I know that I wasn't able to go to any of them, but I know that the meetings are happening. I just have a few questions for TAC. How many people or how many tenants are in the advisory committee?
so through the chair, I don't know, Julio, if you're able to speak to this. Julio's our manager of tenant engagement in terms of specifics.
Thank you, Nadia. To the chair, Director Shiva, there are currently there are 18 members in the tenant advisory committee. We have some vacancies, and we're going through that recruitment process that we launched last year to replace those vacancies according to the results of the interview process that we had last year.
So there's 18 members currently, and how many vacant spots are there?
We have another 3.
And then it says that the tenant community action table meeting took place across the 3 regions, East, Central, and West. I guess the question is the amount of members that are in the advisory committee, is it equally dispersed between all the regions?
To the chair, Director Shiva, so there are an equal number. That wasn't the focus. Our focus throughout our reach was to ensure that we have a diverse representation in terms of tenants, whether they were part of the tenant engagement system or not. And that was a primary focus of our recruitment.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Further questions for committee members?
Yeah, yes, please. I just want to go back and understand there were a number of tenants that were put on the advisory through the bigger tenant engagement, and then the board, all 3 board of direct tenants who are members of the board, so 3 tenant directors of TCHC, and then there was a recruitment through the city of other members. And how many, could you just outline what those numbers are? How many for each?
So through the chair, Councilor Fletcher, originally we had about 15 members that were recruited previously through the motion. To our recruitment process, we recruited another 6 members in addition to the 3 tenants director of the board.
So 15 from that came to the board, and then the board sent it back to have more recruitment through the city, like tenants first, so that was 6, and then another 3. So that altogether would have been 24 members, and right now there's 18, so 6 are missing, is that right?
So it's 18 current members, plus the tenant directors.
So plus the tenant.
Yeah, so the tenant directors, do participate. As Director Ferrara mentioned, she hasn't necessarily been able to come, but she is included in all communication. So it's the other two tenant directors that attend regularly.
So 18 plus the 3, so really it's 21, 24. And then for the new recruitment, I'd like to make sure we've established that in the way that it was done previously, where we're working with the city to recruit those members, and they're not just volunteers for this committee, please. What's the process?
So through the chair, there was a list of eligible tenants who did not make the original 21. So what we've been able to do, and I don't know, Jen, if you want to comment from the city perspective, but we're certainly working with the city in terms of moving through that eligibility list for the additional individuals that were to be qualified that weren't chosen in the first round. So we're not doing a separate recruitment. We're working with the city to go through the list of individuals that applied in the expanded outreach.
So not from the original 15, on the expanded outreach and then recruiting that way. So you're using that list and working with tenants first. That's great. Perfect. Thank you.
So I have a question. So it was decided that we would eliminate the requirement for tenants in arrears to have a prepayment agreement. Was that just recently decided then?
So through the chair, one of the items and the tenant volunteer policy for the tenant engagement system went through TAP, I believe 2 or 3 times. And it was based on input from TAP members and tenant board members as well, where they felt that that wasn't and shouldn't be a criteria for tenants being engaged in the system. And so it was based on that feedback that we removed it as a requirement.
So they are an advisory committee, but that doesn't necessarily mean they always give good advice, and we don't necessarily have to take it. I mean, was that, I mean, if somebody's been in arrears, I guess it depends. If they're just like 10 days overdue on the latest month, you shouldn't get that as a volunteer. But if they're chronically in arrears, it's almost like rewarding them.
So through the chair, we did have extensive discussion with TAC. We also spoke to our staff as well. And what we thought, ultimately where we landed was if it was creating a barrier to access, there are tenants who have individual circumstances that might allow them to land in arrears. As long as we're working with the file, we didn't want to put it as stipulation. We obviously continue to work with all of the households, particularly those in arrears, but we also didn't want to penalize a tenant rep who's doing great work, for example, that might have a tenant service coordinator that might have miscalculated the rent or a variety of factors. And so we thought we wouldn't put it as a stipulation, but it's not to suggest that it isn't something that we work with the tenants on individually.
And I don't know to what degree somebody's been volunteering and didn't pay their rent in over a year, but it's probably not a scenario. The other question I had is that they decided that every division will have its own volunteer policy. So that's going to create, like a patchwork of volunteer policies. Isn't that going to be, kind of, I don't understand why that's necessary. Wouldn't it be easier to have just sort of one overarching sort of global volunteer policy?
So it's a matter that we discussed at the OT, and what well, the conclusion that we came to was that a volunteer's role as far as the tenant engagement system is concerned might be different than the role of a volunteer in other parts of the organization. And so rather than have one size fits all policy, we have an overarching volunteer policy that would prescribe for divisions who were to implement a their own tenant volunteer policy. Here are the elements the policy has been made. So the intention isn't that there would be no corporate policy, but that the corporate policy would be the sort of umbrella that would set the basic terms of divisional policy. So we're still working on the divisional policy, on the overall corporate policy, that umbrella type approach, but there was a recognized need to establish the tenant volunteer policy with some greater urgency as far as the tenant engagement policy is concerned, or process is concerned, and that's what people is needed today.
So educate me, how many different, volunteer scenarios are there? Just trauma, housing.
So there are a few different scenarios and the volunteers play different roles. within the system. So for example, we might have tenants that participate in our community gardening program, or they're local volunteers, but they're not necessarily engaged in the tenant engagement system. We might have tenant volunteers that support children and youth events, such as our Rookie League summer camp, that aren't necessarily engaged directly in the system. We may also have individuals who we deem as volunteers through our revitalization process in terms of giving input. And so one of the concerns was creating a policy that that may not be as specific as required in the instances of the tenant engagement system, which is why we moved forward with this. We had some challenges with some members of the system, and we wanted to have updated policies and procedures so that we could start to action having the right representation at a local level.
Good, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? No. Okay, motion, that's the last item on the agenda. Motion to receive item 8D, please. Moved by Councilor Fletcher. All in favor? Thank you. Need a motion to, we're going to go into private session right after this, within, like 2 minutes. And so we just need a motion to adjourn the public session. Director Furtado, moved by Marcel. All in favor? Thank you.